I'm the guy who writes the rules. I'm not new to Reddit. It's one of my favorite ways to unwind after a long and particularly exhausting night of work. However, I only recently found this subreddit. I read many of the various tales recounted by the night watchmen, security guards, and delivery drivers whose survival was thanks only to a mysterious list outlining the rules they had to follow. I realized that, through my efforts, a portion of the survivors of such events are able to share their stories because of me. Because, you see, my name is Rudolph Walters, and I'm the guy who writes the rules. Well, not all of them, of course. Many are created by the first or second person placed in such terrible, paranormal situations. I find that those ones are usually reliable, and require only small alteration. However, there are some companies and organizations out there who would rather not see an employee's life tossed aside fruitlessly. That's when I get called in. Even for such an oddly specific job, it's not that hard to find me. I'll find out one way or another, as long as a potential client is asking the right questions. For a rather modest sum, I'll stay at the problem location or perform whatever task stirs up trouble of the otherworldly variety. During my stay, I'll experience what surprises are in store for anyone who comes after me. Then, I'll factor in what the client actually needs their employee to do. Finally, I'll formulate a specific set of rules designed to keep everyone safe and happy, as well as keeping food on my plate. The life expectancy for the average person couldn't be expected to be very long. Lucky for me, and my clients, I'm not an average person. I once was that night security guard, armed only with a list of rules to protect me, at a funeral home in Scotland, to be exact. One night, though, I slipped up. I died. For how long? I can't say. Someone, something, or maybe even nothing, took pity on me though. I came back, as it were. What I learned on the other side is invaluable in helping me do my job. Certain patterns, boundaries, and rather powerful beings are among my arsenal of information. On top of that, a few unusual abilities give me some extra boosts. One of these abilities is a helpful disinclination towards experiencing fear. I'd never felt fear, until I was contacted by a library in Maine. Libraries constitute a large portion of my client base, so there wasn't anything inherently wrong, until I realized that, 2 years prior, I had already written a set of rules for this library. I had been called to rewrite the rules before. I usually didn't charge those times, and the problems usually revolved around special events not factored into my research. This was different, though. My longest time in between initial drafting and an editing session had been 1 month. 2 years had passed now, and I felt a fair bit of unease as I booked and boarded my flight. Not fear, simple unease. The library director had told me that the watchman had begun reporting that the nightly routines were changing. The rules couldn't prepare them for what was ahead anymore. The last straw had been the disappearance of their most experienced guard. I planned to return the night I arrived in the city. The library had been closed for only an hour when I walked through the ornate doors of the old building. I moved to the front desk and met the guard on duty that night. I requested that she leave. It would be safer that way. She got up and moved a bit too quickly towards the doors. I hope you figure it out right this time, she said with a subtle note of anger in her voice. Cal was a good guy. He deserved better, poor lad, I thought as I picked up the list of rules I had written so long ago. It all came back to me rather quickly. This library was a mite more dangerous than many of the others, but it was still better than my one time as a truck driver. I mentally prepared myself and walked through the inner security doors that protected the desk from the rest of the library. After an hour of exploring and patrolling, I ran into them. They're quite common, really, entities who seem distressed and beg for help. I ignored them, as the rules said to. They went away soon. No change there, I thought. For another 2 hours, I moved through the library, following the rituals that had previously guaranteed safety. Investigate the noise, hide from the footsteps, and lock all of the doors that shouldn't have existed. Then, it all changed. I was in the boiler room, a rather small space made larger by the wall lined with mirrors. It was dark, naturally. On my last visit, I had found nothing amiss with the boiler room. I had marked it as a bluntly named safe spot. However, I found that I was drawn to staring at the eyes of my reflection upon the wall. Something was wrong. I wasn't the most self-absorbed man, but I had spent a fair bit of time in front of my bathroom mirror, looking at my own face. Anyone could probably have realized what was wrong with this reflection. I stared deeper into my boiler room reflection's green eyes. My eyes were blue. I backed away slowly. My reflection grew larger. Its limbs became distorted. Its face twisted. It started to split apart, become fuzzy or clouded vision. Then it stepped out of the mirror. For the first time since I had died, I felt it. Fear. I turned and ran up the stairs. A shriek followed me, an unworldly, ungodly noise. It shook me to my core. This hadn't been here before, a new entity, and I had just become its new plaything. I dashed down halls and flew up and down stairs. It was behind me most of the way, but I had lost it. I was a peculiarly fast runner. I found myself in the main hall. They were there. One grabbed my arm. "You have to help us. It doesn't want us here anymore," they pleaded. I ignored them, my hands shaking. Then I felt something hit my head. I whipped around, terrified. They hadn't gone away. One had reached out and struck me. No longer were they sad, distressed phantasms. Now, they wanted to hurt someone. Me. They all began to shriek, a sound as loud as my reflections. I wasn't safe anymore. I had to leave. To hell with the client, or it's me to damnation. I ran towards the security doors, but they did not slide open as I approached. There is no way I can break those, I thought. I turned around to see them moving steadily closer. I looked over their heads, towards the wall behind them, but perhaps a window. I put my head down and charged through the ethereal crowd, wincing slightly at every blow and shove. I emerged out the other side and grabbed a metal cart, hurling it at the nearest floor-to-ceiling window. It shattered, raining broken glass onto the dark street outside. A howl from the stairs forced my legs out the window. Glass cuts be damned. I threw myself in my car and peeled out of the parking lot. All the while, a shadow watched me from the broken window. I'm sitting in my hotel room, shaking. I'm posting this here because I know that many of you have experienced the paranormal, maybe even understand it to some degree, but I wasn't prepared for what I met in that library tonight. I only barely escaped. Even now, I still feel like that shadow could be waiting outside my window. But that's not possible. The rules stop them from leaving, don't they? I watched a weird ad on YouTube and now everyone I look at is faceless. It was 1 a.m. It was rainy outside and all I could hear was the heavy drumming of the rain on the roof. The occasional lightning strike was the only thing that interrupted the rain. I was sitting in my bedroom watching literally anything I could find on YouTube. I was pretty sleepy and decided to watch one last video. I've been repeating this one last video pattern for about the last hour and just continued watching more stuff. Suddenly the video I was watching abruptly ended and I was looking at a black screen. I saw the yellow bar at the bottom and realized an ad was loading up. As quickly as the black screen had appeared, it disappeared and the ad started playing. It was one of those heavily edited face cream advertisements, except it was beyond photoshopped. The skin was literally smooth as glass. It was weirdly unnerving. The face looked like a plastic doll. Before I had to watch any more of that weird ad, my laptop crashed. It froze on the close-up of a literal plastic face and then the screen went black. I closed the lid on my laptop a little too aggressively and set it down on my bedside table. Enough YouTube for today. I rolled around a bit in bed thinking about the ad and cringing internally. For a while I lay awake contemplating my life choices until my thoughts got mixed up and sleep took over. In the morning, I woke up, covered in cold sweat. I was scared and my heart was racing. I had woken up from a nightmare but I couldn't remember it at all. Vague memories of the nightmare slowly faded away from my memory and I struggled to recall anything except for one thing: faceless people. I got out of bed and started to get ready for work. That extinguished any memory I had of my nightmare and I continued on with my daily routine. I was a bit sleepy from not getting adequate sleep and I could feel a bad headache setting in. I got out of home and started driving to the nearest 7-Eleven to grab myself some coffee and maybe a donut. I stopped at a red light signal at an intersection. The cars in front of me started to turn right. I was switching between looking at the traffic signals and the cars ahead of me when I caught something. Literally every driver of the cars ahead of me were faceless. They had absolutely no facial features, just eyes, 2 little holes for nostrils and an opening for a toothless mouth. Their skin was just smooth like the ad I had seen last night. I was frozen in place when the car behind me blared its horn and I instinctively looked up at the traffic lights. The light was green and I quickly accelerated and turned to my right. After a bit I pulled over into a 7-Eleven. I could not process what I had just seen. Was I just tired and seeing things? I rubbed my eyes like that would fix my problem and got out of the car to get myself some coffee. I wasn't going to let some hallucination just ruin my day. It was probably just a combination of the sun shining right into my eyes and my tired mind. I pushed it all to the back of my head as I walked over to the store. When I walked in, the first person that my eyes fell on was the cashier. He had no facial features, like someone erased everything. He had 2 openings for eyes. By openings I mean, like, imagine cutting out eyes on a skin-colored paper and then looking at someone looking through them. That's exactly how it looked like. His nose was again just 2 small openings. His mouth was the worst. It was a gaping hole in his face. The mouth was slightly open in a smile and it was reddish dark inside, like it was filled with blood. His skin was smooth as plastic. The cashier looked at me and my scream caught in my throat. A whimper came out of my mouth. I stumbled backwards and fell. My head bounced on the marble floor and dull pain echoed through my head. I lifted my head and saw the cashier rushing over towards me. I crawled backward as my eyes started tearing up from the pain. My vision got blurry when I struggled to my feet and started running out. My legs felt rubbery and unstable. I tripped a couple of times before I got into my car and slammed the door shut. My hands were shaking so hard I couldn't put my keys in the ignition. The cashier stared at me from inside the store, his flat featureless face pressed against the glass. I was literally hyperventilating. I drove back home and nearly crashed my car twice. I jumped every time I saw a driver inside a car. They all had the same featureless face. I started crying uncontrollably when I came home. I parked my car and started running up the driveway to my front door. My neighbor who was watering his garden looked up at me and he was faceless as well. It took me a long time to get my keys in the keyhole because of my shaking hands. My hands were so sweaty, I couldn't get a grip on keys. My neighbor had no mercy and he continued staring at me. As soon as I got inside my house, I ran up to my bedroom and locked the door to that as well. I collapsed on my bed and started having a panic attack. Some low chanting outside my house interrupted me while I was breaking down. I rushed over to the window and saw hundreds of them circled around my house. They were all staring at me and saying something. I strained my ears to listen to what they were saying. By our face cream for beautiful smooth skin, they are coming closer and closer. I can hear them knocking on my door.